show you a different way of reconstructing the arch. So sort of fundamentally, the same concept, but of obviously, reconstructing the arch and bringing the pulmonary artery and the aorta together. I'm just going to sort of tie the duct off, as it were, on the models. So I've got a stay suture on your right atrial appendage again, just to get it out of the way. So usually you'll have it out of the way with your, so what do you think? We might use that as a stay, yeah. So and obviously, we're not really talking about the arch reconstruction rather than the sort of your source of pulmonary blood flow, which is obviously another discussion. So we tend to do a sort of Sarno Norwood with an RVPA conduit. So we'd usually do the conduit really before you come to the moment of the arch reconstruction, which is later on in the procedure. So the first thing often you'd have done is to disconnect your pulmonary artery. So just like we were discussing in the switch yesterday, it's setting yourself up, make sure you've mobilized everything the way you want to, and you can see where everything is. So you know where your right pulmonary artery is and your left pulmonary artery, so you can see them there. You're seeing it all on the model, okay? Yeah, okay. So you have to divide your pulmonary artery, and you've usually again not got much room between the origin of the right pulmonary artery and the top of the valve, the sort of sinotubular junction. It's a slightly sort of bigger valve today, so it makes it slightly easier. And usually you've got a little bit more room on the left side than you have on the right. You have to be a bit careful when you look inside to make sure you don't find yourself in the sort of right pulmonary artery. I tend to do this right at the beginning of the operation. So you can look inside, you can see, I'm even passing my scissors there into the left pulmonary artery. You've got more room on the left, so you can actually make your little sort of pulmonary artery stump a little bit longer on that side if you need to. And you then have to decide what you're going to do with this defect that you're left with here. And some people close it like that, sort of longitudinally. Some people close it transversely. The problem is whatever you do, often you get some narrowing into the origins of the pulmonary arteries. I tend to just put a little patch on here and let it sort of, then you're more confident you're not going to narrow down the origin of the left pulmonary artery. But you can close it. And what do you do, Glenn? Did you talk about it this morning? What?
I didn't talk about it.
No, but
yeah,
sort of comes out, yeah.
And whack out a bunch so it's not so bulky.
Yeah, so you can cut out all the duct tissue as well if you want to. But so here we are. We've got the pulmonary artery root here. Now we're left with a hypoplastic arch. So again, when you come to do the arch reconstruction, the first thing you tend to do is to just transect the duct. And again, if you've got a stay suture on there, it'll retract. Today we've got nothing holding it, but I can sort of push it out the way. Okay, so you're left with a duct, and you'll want to cut the whole duct out. And there's not really a coarctation in a ridge in this model. And I think you did a resection and interdigitating repair this morning, so I'm not going to sort of spend time on that. Normally, if there's a coarctation ridge, you've got to cut this whole area out at the isthmus. If there's no ridge, then often you don't need to. You can get away and leave it in place, but you want to be sure that there isn't any coarctation that you're leaving behind. And you make that relieving incision down into the descending aorta, and then we'll take the pot scissors, and then we have to open out the whole aorta. So I'm sure this is exactly the same as you saw this morning, and you're just opening out the aorta all the way around the inner curvature. Thanks, one. Yeah, if you can follow it down all the way around, and the pot scissors kind of lead you around, and it's really important to stay on the inner curvature. I say now for this sort of technique, I really push to open up the inner curve of the aorta all the way down into that little root, because it tends to just start to open up. Even aortic atresia, when it's a small aorta like this, it tends to just start to open up. So you want to really come right down, low down into this little root to really let it open up. You can see it then, because that's where your coronaries are. You can see the coronaries nicely on this model. So you really have to come a long way down, and make sure you have to work hard to make sure you stay on the inner curvature so that you're facing the pulmonary artery. And if you see that, I've come down below the height of where we've transected the main pulmonary artery. So my incisions actually come below that level. As I say, so now if we go back towards the arch, you can see there's no sign of a cartilage ridge here, so you don't necessarily need to remove it, but you just want to trim some of these little edges off, which are often still ductal material, and you want to try and get back to healthy aortic wall and not duct tissue. So all this tends to come out if you can. But I say I'm not going to do this sort of back wall, it saves us a bit of time. So you then need a patch. I think you look today at I'll bring this into camera. So this is some Gore-Tex I've got. It's quite nice and soft. So I would usually use pulmonary homograft for the patch because it's very kind of forgiving. It's soft, it's pliable, it doesn't tend to calcify. And I just make a simple sort of long oval shaped patch. See, it's a bit wide at the moment. I hope you can see that. And then obviously you're going to trim it as you go along. Yeah, but as you can see, yeah, so that's almost twice the width of the descending aorta in terms of the size of your patch. It's probably ever so slightly big. And once I've got the arch repaired, I tend to have a few minutes of complete circle rest to really make sure I've got a good view of the arch and you've seen everything and you've got everything displayed properly. Do an atrial septectomy and then go on to head and neck perfusion whilst you reconstruct the arch. You need to have a little clamp on the descending aorta. Some people will make a cut down into here and just join them together, but you'll see what I'll do here is we're actually going to bring the patch all the way around. We've got quite a long way to come. I hope it's not going to be boring watching me sewing. So we've got a shot on the end there, right? I say usually you get quite a nice view as long as you've got your clamps everywhere. You've got your clamp on the descending aorta and all your head and neck vessels are snared down. So again, usually you want to spread the patch across the bottom here to make sure you're putting lots of width of patch into the aorta. So across the bottom here. And spread the sutures out. Okay, one, we can go down. I need more length on mine actually than yours. So try and make sure you've got two equal halves. That's it. There it goes. Okay, you got it. And then you run up here, and you have to be careful. Okay, sometimes there's ductal tissue here, and you want to, if you want to just stop and cut away the ductal tissue because it's hopeless stuff. It'll shrink if you leave it behind. If it's still there, you can almost exclude it with your sutures. Oops, that's it. So you're running along here. That's it. And I guess if you haven't got pulmonary homograft, then the most common thing people use is autologous pericardium that's been fixed with glutaraldehyde. That's a good substitute. It does tend to stiffen and calcify a bit more. And after that, people are using stuff like Cardiacell, kind of decellularized pericardium, and whatever you can get your hands on, really. Glenn, what do you use? Pulmonary homograft, yeah. So we're already coming onto the transverse arch here. let's just pull their fun so it comes around. So yeah, you can probably let go there now. That's it.
David, do you space them equally between the...
Yeah, I think so. You're trying to spread the patch out around the apex of the descending aorta to give it width. As you come up around here, you don't need to worry so much, and you can just balance your sutures as you come around. Usually the sort of aortic tissue is reasonably good quality once you've got away from all the ductal tissue. That's it. But this sort of technique tends to be what I do for most Norwoods, particularly if the aorta is small, because I feel it really augments the aorta maximally all the way down into the root. And if you're an aortic atresia, as you usually are when it's a very small aorta, then you're completely dependent on the kind of retrograde flow, if you like, into the coronaries that's coming around the arch. So I really feel I want to maximize the size of the ascending aorta and the route of blood flow into the coronaries. So I think generally the biggest worry in these little, when you've got a very small aorta, is that somehow you're distorting it, and so you're not getting good coronary blood flow. I've found this generally a reliable way of making sure your aorta is nicely wide open. And it's fairly reproducible in all kind of anatomies. So let's pop a shot on there. I've just got to come up with the other one. Again, so I just find it, doing it this way, you've usually got, you can run the whole thing kind of forehand pretty well. And there's so much sewing that you've got to do in a Norwood. All the time you're trying to make sure that every suture line you're doing is going to be as watertight as possible, because at the end there's so many things otherwise that could be bleeding. So really working hard to try and make sure every suture is going to be a good bite of tissue and going to be watertight is good, and it's getting rid of all that ductal tissue, which is important. Nabila, we okay? You're seeing it all on the screen, okay? But again, it's setting yourself up. So again, even at the very beginning of the operation, working hard to mobilize all these tissues and have them nicely displayed and not bleeding makes it much easier when you come to the business end of the surgery. And I say you have to be prepared in most cases that you may have to resect the coarctation, and you have to remember that when you do that, when you resect the coarctation ridge or the isthmus and put it back together, you are shortening the arch, and that is potentially a problem because it means all the structures that have to pass underneath the arch, the bronchus and the left pulmonary artery, are going to be slightly squashed. And you can't really do anything about that. That's just the way it is. But you've got to just bear that in mind. Certainly, as some of the studies we had from the UK suggested that the biggest risk for left pulmonary artery stenosis in terms of follow-up was the fact that you had to resect and do an end-to-end anastomosis with the coarctation site, because it just limits the space in the arch. So if they genuinely don't have a coarctation ridge, there is potentially an advantage to leave everything in place, because it just makes the arch a bit longer. So I hope you can see now that sort of simple oval shaped patch is coming up as we follow it round. It's just a long aorta. Often it is a long aorta when it's aortic atresia. So a bit boring to watch, I'm afraid. So if I were doing a sano, which I usually prefer to do if possible, then the order of the surgery would be we would do the to transect the main pulmonary artery like you saw at the beginning, patch repair the little defect in the branches, then put in the distal conduit, then get some cardioplegia, put in the proximal conduit into a little ventriculotomy, and then finally do the arch after we've completed the whole conduit part of the operation. So you can see the patch coming around the transverse arch now and coming past some of the head and neck vessels. We can just stop there, Juan. Okay, let's just move my shot. I'm going to carry on now. We've brought the patch up from the depths, and we're now bringing the patch down into the ascending aorta. Okay, that's fine. I say if you want to be really clever, you can kind of be on more than just head and neck perfusion for this. Some people are now putting a little graft onto the descending aorta through the back of the pericardium, or you can pass a little perfusion cannula down through the through your clamp down here, so you can actually be on full flow at this point, which is pretty clever. But I've never done that. I've just used head and neck perfusion really. You see we're coming all the way down this little aorta down to where we've transected it. So you can see my patch now is going to need to be trimmed in a moment as we come down to the bottom. So I'm just going to stop and we're going to trim the patch. Okay, I'm running out of suture there a bit. So my length is good, I think. We're all the way down to the bottom, but I don't need quite so much width because the aorta is so much smaller. Here, just grab that one. So here we can just trim the patch up to where I was before. Okay, let's go. Sorry. Okay. You can see you can really come a long way down the aorta here. So you really want to make sure you can see your needle coming full thickness and not doing anything daft like picking up the back wall. And now right down to the apex of the suture line. Okay, so now I've actually come around the apex. I'm starting to come back up the other side. I'm running out of string. Fine. I didn't get my halves right. Do you say you've got an 11 blade there, Nabil? So okay, if you can you follow that on the screen? Yeah. So you see how the arch now has come all the way around the patch, all the way around the arch. As we look inside, can we? Hope you can see that all the way around. Yeah. So you've got plenty of patch material augmenting the whole arch, but really augmenting yourself right down into that, maximising your way into that little tiny aorta. So you've now got to bring the little pulmonary artery root and bring it up into here to finish off your reconstruction. So where's that blade? Here we are. So this is the sort of manoeuvre. You can see the belly of the patch, the lowest point, and persuade the knife through. There we are. So you make a big opening in the patch. Take our scissors. If you hold opposite me, I might use the finer scissors. And then we're going to make this opening in the patch to receive the pulmonary artery. So often it goes back a good way, but you're staying in the sort of most dependent part of the patch. And then here, if you hold that there, that's it. And we come down in the middle of the patch, because remember we made the incision into there, and that should be plenty, yeah? So this will hopefully tell you where it wants to be. And that's going to sit up in there. And you're kind of bringing the patch together, so hopefully you don't distort the pulmonary artery root this way at all. Let's have another 7/0. Oops. The holders there. That's it. Yeah, okay. So we look at the this nice big pulmonary artery root. Take it to the furthest point, and its furthest point is going to go into there, into the patch. Yeah, okay, rubber shell on the end. And it's one potential sort of and valid criticism is that, you know, obviously you're putting the pulmonary root here into a fixed size defect in the patch, so is the worry that there's no option for growth, which is I think is a potential worry, because you're putting it into this opening in the pulmonary homograft. It doesn't seem to have been a problem for us. You can see how big it's, you know, typical that the pulmonary artery root is often sort of 12-14 millimeters in diameter. If you make a good generous opening into the homograft, then it doesn't really seem to be an issue, and that we've not seen them coming back with stenoses here. It naturally can stretch up a little bit. And I just like the way that it holds your neopulmonary root, as it were, the Damus reconstruction in a nice orthotopic, you know, position in its normal way. You're not distorting it, and you can even kind of look at this point down through that valve and try and make sure you're not distorting the valve. So we're achieving exactly what you did with the other technique this morning. It's just a different way of doing it. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Juan's been up doing a transplant all night. I'm impressed. 10 minutes sleep you had, you said, yeah?
Yeah.
Plenty.
His commitment to education. It's unrivaled.
Okay, it's going to come out. And we can, so there we are, we've got to the sort of bottom of it. And then come up the other side. Oops. It's a nice big pulmonary artery in these models, but it's, you know, it's pretty typical that the pulmonary artery root is a big size. So you can see how in a way this patch is giving height. You've got all this extra height into the arch, so you haven't got to distort the pulmonary artery by dragging it up to meet the aorta so much. You can probably stop there. Yeah, and you can always stop and look inside, make sure your valve's okay, make sure your arch is okay around there, and you should be able to see down here into the little aortic root, yeah, where we've patched and enlarged it, yeah. So you've hopefully made that as big as possible down in there. Let me come around with this one. Okay, and then you just have to decide how far back. You usually don't want to take this opening any further back, than somewhere between the carotid and the subclavian, so you're not pushing it too far backwards, but it usually ends up around that sort of laterality. And again, having plenty of tissue here hopefully keeps the tension off the suture lines a bit, so they're less likely to bleed. And again, having plenty of tissue means you can take good bites, both of your patch and the pulmonary artery. Okay. Okay, so I'll just tie that up and then we're done really. There you go. So you can see that's really it. So there's the all you have to do now is just finish off this suture line here to close off the patch into there. Again, you can see that's your nice way into the main pulmonary artery. Here's your way down into the arch, reconstructed, and here's the way down into the aortic root down there. So hopefully you've maximised your sort of coronary blood flow by keeping that nice and wide open, and you're holding the aorta and the pulmonary artery in their natural position. And you can look at your suture line by pulling the aorta over. So if you're looking for bleeding points, look down this side of your suture line as well. Yeah. Okay.